Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Erika. I am the events coordinator for Books Are Magic. Before we get started, I did want to go over some housekeeping points. First off, we are kindly asking folks to keep their mask on at all times during this event. For those who are just coming in, we do have seats, plenty of seats up here at the front. Do not be shy. Come up close to your authors. If you have masks to spare, needed at the check-in desk. Towards the end of the conversation, we will be doing an audience Q&A, so start thinking of questions to ask now and raise your hand once the time comes. After the talk tonight, Caroline and Erika will be signing and personalizing books. Additionally, we have extra copies of Weird Girls and White Horse available for purchase from my colleagues JG and Isabella, whom you met at check-in. If you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we highly encourage you to buy a copy of Weird Girls or White Horse online using the link in the live stream description. Tonight it is my privilege to introduce Caroline Hagood and Erika Wurth, who are here to read from and discuss their books Weird Girls and White Horse. Weird Girls shifts our attention to the very best parts and the unfortunately ignored parts of women as artist and storyteller and asks us to embrace it. White Horse is a gritty horror novel, one that will leave you excited to read more of Erika's work. This is an exciting pairing for us tonight. Where Weird Girls calls for us to embrace the art monster, White Horse serves that on a beautifully adorned gold platter. Caroline Hagood is an assistant professor of literature, writing, and publishing, and director of undergraduate writing at St. Francis College in Brooklyn. She is the author of the poetry books Lunatic Speaks and Making Maxine's Baby, the book-length essay Ways of Looking at a Woman, and the novel Ghosts of America. Her work has appeared in publications including Creative Nonfiction, Lit Hub, The Kenyon Review, Hanging Loose, and others. Erika T. Wurth's work has appeared or is forthcoming in numerous journals including BuzzFeed, Boulevard, Lit Hub, The Writer's Chronicle, and The Kenyon Review. She is a Kenyon and Sewanee Fellow and a narrative artist for the Meow Wolf Denver installation. She is an urban native of Apache, Chickasaw, and Cherokee descent. So without any further delay, everyone please join me in giving a warm welcome to Caroline and Erika.
So apparently I am supposed to go first, which I'm fine with. I am a dumbass, I will warn you. I not only forgot after all these cities that I've done to tour with White Horse, I've forgotten my questions for Carolyn, but thank God I have like some kind of...
It's going to be more spontaneous.
Yeah,
it's going to be better. You're going to see it's going to be better. We're both very, very chatty Cathys. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, and I think I remember my questions, right? I've done this for years. And secondly, I forgot your book to sign. I carried it to 6 cities.
It's really okay.
To forget.
I've seen your post. You've been all around the world. It's a lot.
And I'm gently fried. Anyway, I just want to thank the Flatiron people for coming. Maxine, who's my editor, and I know Catherine is around there. There's Catherine, who's just our social media master, and my friend Rich, who's put up with me coming to New York for years, and his husband who came, and just my friend Robert, who's an awesome part of the horror community, and I'm so grateful for him. And Amara, my friend who's with Simon & Schuster, and all of you for coming. Thank you so much. And Molly, who's just a powerhouse you just can't even imagine. So I'm going to read just super, super quickly, just a quick maybe 5-minute excerpt. Carolyn's going to read, and then we're going to do a back and forth conversation. So
Very spontaneous.
yes, very spontaneous because of me. I put my little glasses here. All right. So I think most of you might be familiar with this at this point, but the short log line, right, is Indigenous literary horror, and the longer one is it's about Carrie, who loves heavy metal and loves horror, and despises the mother who she thinks abandoned her when she was 2 days old, and then her super well-intentioned white cousin Debbie finds this. She's so sweet and cute, she finds this ancient bracelet that belonged to her mother, and the main character touches it, and her mother's ghost begins to haunt her, and then this sort of evil Bigfoot character invades her dreams and then her reality. And then she decides she has to find out what happened to her mother. So I'm bad at multitasking. It's always hot.
It's always
I can-
awkward. It's
I
always
can do it.
There's always a weird elbow motion.
Yeah. I'll be surprised if I don't knock my glasses right across
I'm gonna move
the
this a
room.
little further.
That is actually what my boyfriend does about 10 times a day.
I do it for my kids.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate it. All right. There was something strange, mysterious even, about the White Horse tonight. Normally, it was merely an Indian bar, my Indian bar. but there was a milky, dreamy quality to the red light swinging over the pool tables, like the wind from the open doors was bringing them something new, something I'd pushed away for as long as I could remember. Debbie, do we have to talk about her again? I took another swig of my beer and slammed it back down, eyeing my cousin as I did. She would never let the subject go, no matter how much I rebuffed her. I sighed, taking in the dank, wet wood smell of the bar, the harsh laughter of the bikers in the booth behind me. The thing is, I interrupted her with a brush of my hand. I hoped Nick, the bartender, would come by and ask me if I needed a refill, but all I could see was the mirror in front of me, the words Miller High Life emblazoned in gold cursive on the front. Right next to it, a sign read, "First fight, last drink, permanent 86. Besides us, the bartender and the bikers, the White Horse was empty. It was always empty, but I loved it. I loved the long wooden bar, the cats wandering in and out. The mangy orange one was my favorite. She liked to sit on top of the bar and let me pet her while she closed her cloudy eyes and purred. Debbie shifted her weight on the stool, the plastic crackling as she did, the bar stirring around me like a bad dream. All I'm saying is that you don't know your mom's story. Yeah, okay, Debbie, that's great, I said. I signaled Nick when he came out of the bathroom. 2 more, I said, hoping he'd remember. A couple of Diné came through the doors, quiet the way they were, and made their way to a pool table in the back. One of them saw me when he came over to order a beer, and he gave me the friendly head nod, his black hair glistening red in the faint bar light. I nodded back, and that strange feeling I'd had earlier flooded back into me. The thing is, Debbie said, you know how we check in on your dad? I hung my head. Yeah, so? I went over there the other day to do that and some cleaning because I know the nurse is great and everything, but I like to see how he is, and I just come home from work and was dropping the kids off. Jesus, Debbie, if you're not going to let it go, spit it out. Okay, she said, starting again. So Mom had been pushing me to clear some of the boxes in the attic, and like we were going to haul them out and throw them in the dumpster, but Mom seemed to want to look through them, and mainly they were full of old toys and papers and rusting appliances, but then we found something. What, I whispered, and that dreamy quality snapped back. Something of your mom's. I was silent. My mother, the woman who had abandoned me when I was only 2 days old, the woman whom my father had been so devastated over he began to take long drives, a bottle of Jack between his legs, the woman who had made it so that I had to care for my dad like a baby instead of the other way around, after he'd gotten into an accident that had left his body but taken his mind, Cecilia. Thank you.
That was so beautiful. Thank you. So thank you to Books Are Magic, to Emma, Amelie, Erika. Also, I have my middle school poetry teachers here in the front row, without whom, Marty Scoble, without whom none of this would ever have happened. So thank you so much for coming. Miku, my friend who's had to attend so many literary things because she became my friend. Sam, Jason, my long-suffering colleague who has to talk over coffees about writing with me. But anyway, thank you to everyone for being here. So I'll be reading from Weird Girls Writing the Art Monster. It is really hard to summarize. It doesn't have as good of a log line, I have to admit. But essentially just this idea of the art monster, which is an idea that women writers have been writing so many essays about, and I was reading every single one, and I was just obsessed with this idea. It's all I talked about. And finally I thought, I have to write a book about this. And just the way that it intersects with, being a mom and being a woman, and the ways that these things have been kind of kept apart, this idea of being a fierce, monstrous, in a good way, and I talk about it in a good way, creator, and then, and then being a woman and mom as being sort of separate from that. So the section I'm going to read today, if I can locate it, is just about how my kids and I share an obsession with the monster. And again, yes, there is something awkward with the microphone and the holding the book. My kids and I share a fascination with the monster, or perhaps it's more precise to say that, like most children, mine are both drawn to and repelled by monsters. I chase them around the house while roaring loudly, and they love it. We tell monster stories together for hours. It's funny because I can see even now how we're building the basis for their lifelong relationship to monsters and to narrative. My children always want stories with some sort of monster in them, even if they must pay the price. of being scared at bedtime. I tell them this is just how adults feel about the monstrous. My own metamorphosis came about as I followed my guides, my art monster coven of women. Sure, I had always loved monsters and writing, but it wasn't until I had to fight for my art against a torrent of motherhood's many duties, pressures, and expectations that threatened to annihilate my writing that I truly transformed from pleasing young woman into art monster. Okay, so I'm a work in progress and much braver on the page. I still have to edit out the apologies and all that I do and am, but hopefully I'm on my way. The monster is about transgressing borders, bodies, and identities, which is also what writing does for me. So I tell my children these stories that create a world for them in which they could never truly live, but almost, and this is what makes it shimmer so. I create for them an inner womb of stories, since mine is no longer in season, which they can carry with them always, populated by myths and monsters, just as my parents did for me. During the day, my children beg me to play the monster and pursue them, bumbling, wrapped in beach towels around the living room. But at night, they become afraid of the monster. Before bed, we do the various ornate rituals that enable them to actually go the fuck to sleep. And not, I always get like with the curse out loud, okay. I'm like, go the fuck to sleep. But I'm an art monster, so it's fine. And not fear things that go bump in the night. This involves me squishing into their tiny beds and holding on to them like all our lives depend on it. I've never been able to do anything at half-mast, particularly not when it comes to adoring these screwy, marvelous little people who were somehow gifted to me. And then it starts, the monster questions. Are there monsters on the moon? Are there any nice monsters? But see, one night I really just want to go to sleep. And so I tell them, you don't have to be afraid of monsters because I'm queen of the monsters. I'm mommy monster, and they're all afraid of me. As I'm leaving the room, I hear a little voice, my daughter's, I love you, mommy monster, and it just sounds so right. And she's terrified of me. I'm like a good monster, no. Okay, so I will start with a question if you don't mind. So because I was attuned to these kind of characters and these kind of roles as I was reading, I was really drawn to Carrie, the main character, obviously. She loves metal. She's really, she's not held down by a lot of the sort of trappings of like supposed womanhood, like whatever that even is. She's tough, she's creative, she reads all the time. She repurposes The Shining in a sense, in a feminist way. And all of this, and I also love Auntie Squeaker, which I think I've made clear to you in a few tweets, right? Yeah. So Auntie Squeaker, in this trailer, making her magical potions, helping with abortions. I mean, it's almost like a Frankenstein's lab in there. And so these two characters particularly stood out to me as I was reading, and I showed her my copy, which has like coffee stains, like little blood stains from like a paper cut I got, turning the pages so frantically. But basically, yes, I just want to start with how these two characters sort of came about for you, how they became in your mind.
Yeah, I think Carrie is in some ways, I'd love to say like, oh, she's based off of me. No, I was a dork, and she's somewhat based off of a girl who made fun of me like mercilessly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I loved her. And the only...
Isn't it funny how that works? Yeah.
She was like, I think, so in Idaho Springs, so I grew up like, here's Denver, here's Evergreen, and that became kind of yuppie eventually. Here's where I lived in the mountains, which was cheap initially, and here was Idaho Springs. My parents had come from poverty. My dad was a white dude. My mom was native of like various tribes, some from Mexico, some from the Southeast, also of Black descent. And she had met him in Texas. They had both kind of, done that silent generation thing of getting, becoming middle class. And, he's an aerospace engineer and she was a dance teacher and they were educated. They moved to this town in between. I was bused to this school in Idaho Springs, Colorado, and it was a rugged, mean little town. And my dad, totally blew through his money with booze and ladies, So, we should have been middle class, but we weren't. And so in this working class little town, it was primarily working class white, but there was a large contingency of indigenous people, some again from Mexico, some from here of various tribes. And they were tough ladies, and I was a extremely not tough lady. And I ate lunch under the display case, and they would just be worthless, and yeah, and I'd be and it was and it was awful. But at the same time, I think there was a tenderness there because they kind of recognized that I was just a bit too soft for this world. And so Carrie is sort of a conglomeration, primarily of this gal who used to really make fun of me. Sadly, she would call me ugly a lot, and we looked a lot alike. It was sad. She was Native. And, but what was going on in there, I think it's obvious. But she was also just tough and mean. And you could call, what I loved about her and other women where I came from is, yeah, you could call them a slut. And they'd be like, yeah. And these were 16-year-olds. And I just loved how they were completely uncaring about this. So I thought about, okay, what would happen if Carrie had moved to Denver. She didn't go to college. That wasn't her thing. But she had become extremely self-educated. And I wanted to give her and other people back home some kind of dignity in that regard. Okay, not everybody became college educated, but some of them ended up doing perfectly well and being self-educated. And you could ask Carrie, what about Denver history, and she could just tell you, and she would know more than most historians, right? Auntie Squeaker is sort of in many ways just fiction, but again, she's based off of my best friend from back home's mom, who lived in this trailer.
Can I go meet her?
Right? Yeah. Oh, she's dead now, and she became a little.
Can I go meet her?
Crazy. Yeah. Well, yes. In the other world.
In the world of the book,
Yes.
I think so.
Yes. No, but she was the smoker, and she was just a super character, and she would do this Indian tarot, which was tarot was just regular cards, and so I wanted to make her into a more magical kind of curandera figure, So, my book kind of has more literal monsters, right? In some ways, although there's a dreamy factor. What I love about your work, and it's something I always admire about creative nonfiction, is there's a way in which you're talking about bigger issues, but then you're bringing it back home to yourself and your kids. And so, what interested you? I have my own thoughts, but what interested you in this idea of woman as monster?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, so there was this. I mean, so just in case anyone isn't aware, so there's in the 2016, Jenny Offill writes this novel called Department of Speculation, and in it, the character was going to be a quote unquote art monster, but then she became a wife and mother, and she kept writing, so it didn't actually end anything. But for her, this was a big. So anyway, this idea I think is an ancient idea, but this actual term sort of started there. So I was interested in why the monster was in there, why monster was in there. And obviously I think there was obvious things okay, well, she was talking, frequently about men who got to be art monsters because the women sort of dealt with the domestic things. And so there are monsters in the sense that they're jerks, right? Sure, that's one sense of the monster. But then I started thinking, the women are trying to say, but we're art monsters too. And I started thinking, but monsters are very creative beings. They're hybrid. They live beyond, there used to be on the maps where, where people weren't sure where the end of the map was, whatever, it would say, here be monsters or something along those lines. So the ideas in which the monster is beyond thought, that which lives beyond thought. Or if we think about monsters as hybrid creatures, it's the sewing together of all these different things, which is art, at least which is how I view art. And it's also how it's sort of the nature of a lot of the writing that I love is very hybrid. So I started thinking about this, and I started thinking about various, like, women mythological monsters, and thinking, I don't think they just say art monster just because these people are bad or because everybody wants to, like, talk about that. But I think there's something creative and interesting and exciting and deeply inventive and generative about the monster. And that's what I wanted to talk about. And I feel like your novel is exploring that, but in a fictional way, and in a, as you said, more of a literal way. But at the same time, it's like there's still, to me, that narrative there a little bit where Carrie's looking for something. Carrie, and the monster leads her into this whole other world, leads her into action, leads her into figuring out something psychologically. So it's like monster as catalyst,
Yeah.
So I found that really interesting. And I will also say that my book, like, geeks out about horror and horror tropes a lot. So when I read this book, it was just a natural fit. And yeah, I think horror allows women a really interesting way into being, like, badass and creative and sort of taking different paths. At the same time, horror has been used in really misogynistic ways. So how do you kind of, deal with that? And I feel like, your book dealing with Stephen King's The Shining, but then from a feminist perspective, starts to be in conversation with that. So I guess I want to ask a totally open-ended question surrounding that.
It's interesting to I'll answer that and then to quickly go back. The thing that I think a lot about is over the years, so I think a lot of Indigenous and Black women get in trouble because whatever we're encountering back home, which there is, I would say this word wrong, misogynoir, and, like, natives don't even have a term for that, which is a problem. We're still kind of valued, like, for our words, and we still will talk back. And over the years as a teacher, because I've taught every demographic, every single one, my white girls initially, they would be, like, very quiet, and then they would kind of break my heart because I would be like, what do you have to think? Or, like, you said this interesting thing, or, like, what do you I asked them a question, they were like, they said something, I was like, well, elaborate, that's really interesting. And they would do the most disconcerting thing. I would see them afterwards, and they would be like, I love you. And I'd be like, Garth and Wayne's World, if you're old enough, thank you. And I'd be like, why? And I realized it was because for a lot of them, this was the one time I wasn't competition. I wasn't, a man trying to get something from them. Either you're a good girl and I can marry you, or you're a bad girl and I can use you. And they were like, you give a shit about what I have to say as a person. And I was like, oh my God, because back home, it really would be like, they would be clear, like, if you flirted with someone's man, you were going to die. I would say there's like a 10% chance of actual death. So,
you heard it here first.
Yeah, like, I appreciate that directness. Also, as a nerd, I was like, there's no chance. It's really fine.
So he
thinks of me as a worm.
So you got to live.
Yeah, I was like,
see, the nerds, they live.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I hope you take away from tonight.
But what I loved about your book is the idea of, like, going back to those old European ideas of woman as monster, and then you get to be in this position of, like, I don't care. I don't care. Yes, you're right. I'm a monster.
Yeah.
And I think I love the relationship too of your kids seeing you as like, oh, chase me, you're a monster. I'm like, no, the monsters are in my closet. It just goes to show you what the power of fear. And the thing that I thought about as a horror writer was, there's I forgot his last name, maybe Robert remember, Usman Malik. And he said the most interesting thing as I was, like, kind of getting to know the horror community. He's like, you know what? Horror is the one genre that revolves around emotion, which is fear. And he got it from, like, an introduction to an anthology, which I always forget the anthology, even though I ordered it. And I thought that's really kind of powerful. But it's I've forgotten even what your original question was. But
so did I, honestly. It was like, just
really
talk about your amazing words. And Erika was like the basic thing.
But I will say that, like, I think, I do think that what the leap from pure literary to literary horror was for me was a place where I could just be like, no, the monster is real. It's not a matter of, like, oh, at the end it's literary because the ghost wasn't real. I'm like, no, it's not a metaphor, it's real. And there was something about that was really powerful. And I really see that, for example, in, like, P. Djeli's Ring Shout, because if you're saying, no, the KKK are actual monsters, I think that's a really powerful statement. So, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't even know if I answered your question.
Well, I think we're going in a kind of snaking motion
Yes.
past
Yes,
different,
which is my usual.
which I think works.
Yes.
Which I think is good. Right. So when you make a monster literal, there's also something very cathartic about that, right? Because I can be like, I'm an art monster, but like at the end of the day, I'm like taking care of my kids, pleasing everyone, trying to, look okay. I mean, it's like I'm still like doing like some of the human woman things that I wish that I weren't. And so the idea of just being able to actually be like one of the monsters that I talk about in a book like Medusa, and just being able to actually, I mean, yeah, and I can't. But I think, that reading horror, especially feminist horror that reclaims, that looks at what's been done, and here's another thing I want to make sure we talk about. You talk about, Stephen King and the mention of the Indian, he calls it Indian burial ground, obviously, right? Like it's in quotes. There's always an Indian burial ground underneath everything. And so I love how you were like, okay, but I'm going to write it from this perspective, and we're going to look at it this way, rather than, him being like, oh, but there's an Indian burial ground. So I found it interesting, the feminist and the indigenous reclamation of this territory, where you're putting that as the main thing, and you're speaking from that perspective, rather than, oh, by the way, underneath all of this white narrative is this Indian burial ground.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting about Stephen King, because he always has his Indian characters and we're bad guys. I'm like, I will take that over, like I'm just here to help you find out who your spirit animal is. Like, I'm like, actually, I'll take it. But I think with Stephen King, he seems like a reasonable guy. It seems to me anyway that he would be like, well, I wouldn't write that way again, But I think a lot about where I came from, I guess going back to Carrie and the folks like Carrie where I came from, people always say things like Indians don't read or poor people don't read, and I don't like that because it's a lie. And where I came from, everyone was reading Stephen King. You know why? He was smart and he was fun. And he still is, with all of his flaws that I'm sure he would say I have intact, right? And so for me, I think I wanted to engage him in a way that acknowledged hey, maybe he was wrong about these things, but there's a reason why this kind of tough character likes him. And why he didn't like The Shining, the movie, was because he straight up used a very academic word. He was like, look, that woman does not have any agency. He's like, my character is tough. My character has lots of agency.
Which she does when you read the book, which she does, and her inner life is so rich, and we don't get to, obviously it's different with the adaptation to film, but we don't fully get that in. It gets lost in that translation.
But we get to be really scared with her because she seems like such a victim, and then the turn at the end is so sharp, right? So I get it.
Yeah, even thinking of her face, even her physicality is just
childlike. Yeah. But yeah, I guess turning though to your collection, I think the question is, how do you pretty much almost every essay in one way or another kind of turns to that, how do I make, it's even shitty when people ask it, right? Like they never ask men, how do you make time for writing with being a parent? And they always ask women.
And they're like, my wife is always with the kids.
Yes.
It's fabulous.
Yes. So, I mean, how do you, I would say, I feel like you try to engage that a lot in the book. Just okay, I'm a transcending monster, but at the same time, I am a mom. So how would you say that theme, knocks together again and again in the book? Because I feel it does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for one thing, I think, fortunately or unfortunately, I've had to, loop my kids into my creative time. And be like, oh, it's writing time. Here's your little writing area, and here's mine. Yeah. And it works well because my son's public school is incredible, and they have him doing publication parties for his writing, and so he'll be doing his little book, and he takes them very seriously, and he's like, what's happening in your book? And I'm like, well, okay, I can't tell you everything. I actually don't try to scare my kids. I'm actually pretty nice to them, pretty protective of them. But he does love monsters, and so I do tell him things like, the book's about monsters, or I mentioned you. He's always like, did you write about me in the book? Please write about me in the book. I'm like, but when you get older, so we need to make you an elliptical character. And he's like, what's elliptical? No, but the idea is, I think I've had to rope them into it in some ways. And then the other thing too is just very simple things, I always say this, but saying to my partner, you really do need to take him to the playground now. Like you really do. And you say it like in that way at first, and then after a while you're like, because you need to write. You know, but I do. I think those things come up against each other, and I think it's very confusing. And I also think people will tend to read my writing and say like, oh, it's really interesting. I just didn't expect it from you. You know, because it's like if you're cheerful and you're a mom and you're like a pleasant kind of person, people don't really get it if you want to write about dark things, right? They're just like, I don't understand. I thought people were just one thing. I don't understand it. So yeah, I think the word bump up against each other is really appropriate because yeah, like the life of sing-alongs and like cutting little like fruit into pretty shapes, it doesn't have really a lot to do with what I do creatively. It's very, very, very different, but I've had to sort of make those worlds touch. And I think part of that is the fact that my kids love monsters, I love monsters, and even just telling them I'm like going tonight to talk about monsters and, you know, trying to include them in it so that they grow up being like, you know, I want to do something creative rather than just like, I'm so glad I had a stay-at-home mom, which I'm not, which like I you know, sometimes regret. And no, I don't. But anyway.
I don't think there's any way women can't. I pretty much hear all women
The
always
having it all
regret.
thing. Oh my
Yeah,
God,
like you can't
please.
win. It's fine. That's actually the one good thing. Like I always hear, like sometimes I'll listen to or I'll be chatting with women, and they'll be like, "Well, I don't wear this, but she does," or "I don't do this, but she does." I'm like, "Hey, good news, you can't win."
Yeah, and also who cares what she wears?
Yeah,
like let her
win.
wear it. It doesn't matter.
No, but like that to me is the reality of the woman as monster. And I think a lot about these European myths where originally, like women were often monsters, right? And there was this power there, and I can see why people are drawn to it, because I think it's just super important to transcend, even if you can't, those things and say, I can't win. I'm not trying to. I'm doing the best that I can. I'm not. This space is actually better. Just sort of, and this is why I like Carrie, right? Why I admire her, because I may be dorkier than her, but I also have that like sarcastic, like Gen X, like.
I was gonna say there is some of you in her. I mean, like let's not be confused. Like it's there.
Yeah.
It's there, and I think also like that's another thing too I've thought about being a woman and monstrosity and characters like Carrie and also monsters is I like this idea of thinking like as I age I'm gonna become less and less, right? Like the pleasing woman and more like the witch in the hut. Do you know what I mean? Like just like hair growing out and all sorts of it, just like it's all just gonna like fall down and there's something like liberating and I read a character like Carrie and it's very like a lot of my reading is like this where I like think about the characters during the day and sometimes I'll be like while I was reading it sometimes I'd be like I don't think Carrie would have said sorry in this situation because she would know she didn't do anything wrong. Do you know what I mean? Like I think about the characters that I'm engaging with and I will take that sort of like badass inspiration from them. And it's very like childlike, but I'll be like, no, I don't think Carrie would have said sorry when she didn't, you know. So I think sometimes that those characters can be important even when you're an adult. I think we think of kids as being like looking for role models, but I feel like I'm always looking for role models. Like that never ended. And I'd like to say I grew beyond it and like I'm just so grounded now, but it's like no, there's ways where like there's always things you can add to yourself. You know, you could always meet someone who's doing something like, oh, I'd like to skydive, you know, whatever it is. I'd like to be the kind of person who this or that. And I do. I think when I read characters like Carrie, when I read those kind of characters, it opens up possibilities for me about how, like, what's the name of that book? Like, how should a person be? Like, how a person can be. You know, like it's like a menu. Like, oh, here are all the options, and you can kind of pick and choose from these sorts of things. But if you're watching the Stepford Wives all the time, those are your only options.
I will say it's funny because my auntie was like big powwow, big Native American church, and she was like 5 feet tall and like fucking terrifying. And my mom I'd always be like, Mom, she'll kill me one day, and she'd be like, that's terrible. And I'd be like, but a little true.
You're like, but it's true.
A little true. And then she became like born again Christian, like Jesus wants us to be white, and I'm like, I don't think it works that way, but okay. But she still fucking terrifies me, and I still kind of admire her a little bit because she will just tell you like. Like if you interrupt her, you're gonna die. She's like, you talk and then I talk, and that's how it works. And I'm like, yes, yes, you know. And so I kind of like I said, I admire those gals from back home, even if sometimes their lives are tough, because I think what's going on is for Carrie, she knows the way things are or is wrong, but there's only so much she can do about it. And she's also very pragmatic. You know, I was on this podcast called Talking Scared, and I fucking love this podcast, okay? Like, I love it. The guy's British, and it was the first, like, he asked the best questions, like, ever. And I was like, told my people at Flatiron, I'm like, please, you know, put me on this podcast. And he said, yes. I'm like, yay. And then I was listening to one, and I remembered, like, sometimes he'd be like, well, although I think the novel tried, it failed terribly. And then I had to fling the book into hot magma. And I'm like, oh my God, he might not like it. And then I kept baiting him like an asshole on Facebook or on Twitter. I was like, hey, you know, just as long as you don't like the or hate the book. And he would never respond. And then,
That's terrifying. That's like terrifying ahead of a podcast.
oh God.
It's like, what are you walking into then?
Yes, but actually I went on it and I like didn't listen to it because I was on tour, and I messaged him and I was like, hey, or I messaged someone else and I'm like, did he tear me apart? And they're like, no, he liked it. I'm like, okay, thank God. But I think, you know, yeah, it really was. But I think what he touched upon in that podcast was something that people think about Native Americans and Native American fiction a lot, because it's the oldest narrative in the world, which is she doesn't understand her culture. And then she comes to know who her culture is, what her culture is, and she loves it. And I'm like, Carrie fucking loves being Indian, okay? She's like, yeah, think your stereotypes. That'll make it easier for me to make fun of you. What it is, and he, during the podcast, he kind of was like, oh, he was like, oh, I didn't realize this is not where I was going. And I said, yeah, Carrie cares about who she is. She has good female influences like Auntie Squeaker in her environment. But what she's a very cynical Gen X type person. And so, you know, and she's also working class and happy with it. She likes to be self-educated. She's not interested in college. She's just not. And so being spiritual to her is like, it's weird. You know, like, that's nice about your Native American church ceremony. I'm not going to do that. Or she would go and she'd be like, you know. But I think what happens to her over time is there's a non-cheesy way to be a spiritual person. And I think that's something that is a different thing than like discovering your identity, because she knows who she is. She knows where she comes from, right? And I think that's what I always wonder about, like, maybe in essays like yours and in essays like yours, maybe this is, I hear this a lot, this sort of attachment to kind of tougher characters or monstrous characters or monsters, simply because I think a lot of, you know, right, like white women are like, I'm really tired of being in this place of servitude, even in like nice circumstances. So I feel like you handle that really well over and over again. So do you feel like your essays are kind of like, yes, I don't, one way or another, I want to be able to at least teach my children and get myself in a better place of like, I'm not going to say I'm sorry when they did it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I also think like this question of the nice woman is very, very problematic. Like, first of all, I also think there's a difference between nice and kind. Like, there's a difference between like doing stuff to please people and trying to genuinely be good to people. And actually sometimes doing the kind thing will get like a lot of people upset with you. So it's really, really complicated. But anyway, yes, I think I've spent a lifetime trying to get out of being the nice person. I mean, to be kind, but to get out of being the nice person. And I think it's part of my adult journey. But I also think it's like, you know, it's hard to make art if you're giving all your energy away to that and all your time away to that. And just being like an infinite caretaker. I think especially like with students too, you can be caretaky. You know what I mean? Or you can kind of feel responsible for their joys or something like that. So I think like, you know, it is important to create those boundaries. And also just, I think the less you're saying sorry when you don't mean it, the more you have energy to really, to be genuinely sorry when you've messed up and to really fix it. But yeah, I think the word nice is very, very limiting. But what's interesting about Carrie too, and actually we haven't mentioned Debbie, but what's in her best friend or her cousin, but I think Carrie is kind. I just don't think she's nice. Right. And that's actually what I like about her isn't even just like, oh, I love these tough characters, which is totally me too, is totally me, by the way. But also it's like, I like how she's gonna do the kind thing, but she's not gonna spend all day showing you that she's, you know, doing it performatively. I think nice is a performative thing, and I think kind is like, you're gonna do the nice thing and not tell anybody about it. you know, and it's more genuine. And she seems more like that to me. Like she's gonna do the kind thing, but she may not be like, oh hi, how are you? All that stuff.
Well, I think I remember there was a picture of my grandmother, and I think because my family is urban, like we've been urban for the whole length of the time. My family, like I said, some of them are Apache from Mexico, and they came up because Porfirio Diaz was like kicking half of them out, right? Long story. And then because my family is of black descent, even though that was distant, they were free, and those tribes were sovereign, and they owned slaves. And so I think my family was like, good fucking bye. And so went to Texas and started to form this urban community that exists in Winnipeg, Chicago, probably different places in Mexico. And I think there was a picture of my grandmother that I was looking at, and I'd seen all my friends who were from the res, right? And not to say like it's a contrast, because there are plenty of extremely powerful women from traditional communities, but you know, she wasn't like weaving or her hair wasn't long. No, she was a dark woman, clearly native, absolutely encountered tons of racism throughout her life. She was in a sailor suit and like a cool haircut, and she was like, you know, and her, you know, her favorite like pop culture figure was Betty Boop. You know, she was like, I fucking love me some Betty Boop, you know. And so I love that about my grandmother. And I was like, you know, the one good thing about not having your traditional community, not being, you know, shoved into a nice white space with like all the securities it has, is that my grandmother could just be like, this is not my problem. And so I thought a lot about her, and I thought a lot about the girls that I came from, like that I grew up with, that were kind of like, well, you know, no one's looking at me like I'm a nice girl, so I'm just gonna go with that. And there was some freedom there, even if there was garbage and hard stuff. So the question I want to ask though afterwards, and I know we're getting probably close to time, is one of form, because like I'm so drawn to lies, and only on the page. In real life, I'm like someone told me once, like all the Gestapo would have needed to do to get the truth out of me was give me a martini. It's so true.
What a cool.
Yeah, I was like, yes. But what I love about nonfiction is it's a bit more slippery, because you're required to talk about yourself and tell the truth, but it's also like an art form. So I'm always, the only nonfiction I do are like articles of BuzzFeed about other Native American writers trying to prop them up, right? As far as like personal nonfiction, I remember the one thing I did was so weird and experimental, and even then it was like an eighth true. I was like, I'm so uncomfortable. So why would you say that you're drawn to that particular form?
Well, I really like hearing people's stories, and one of the things I talk about in the book is being this really weird mixture of very much wanting to share things about myself because I'm a writer, and then also being very private. So this kind of introverted, extroverted thing that's really torturesome, actually, if you're a writer. And so in the book, like for instance, I'm sure you notice I reference trauma, for instance, but I don't go into it. And I talk about how I don't go into it, and how, and I talk about why. But that's an example of a situation where I think, this is why I like lyric essay form, and not just, I mean, I love essays too, but this is why I like the lyric essay form, because it does, first of all, it doesn't have to march to any sort of beat of any drum. And I think that it can be, you know, I started as a poet, and I think some of that elliptical, you know, non-adherence to truth-telling in a certain way stayed in my creative nonfiction. Not that I'm telling any lies, right? But that I don't feel like I have to lay my entire self bare for you, right? Even if that's what I seem like I'm doing, I'm not, right? I'm holding something for myself, and that's okay. And I think that's part of the way that I've always been very tough, right? Even if I was cheerful or friendly or whatever these bullshit terms are. But anyway, so I'm completely obsessed with, you know, as I said before, like hybrid works where you're like, is this, you know, and I love autofiction. I love all these things that are just like, first of all, what even is this as a form? I really love that. I think that's very, you know, interesting. But I think it's also, but you're absolutely right that there's something, I get extra, you know, nervous to publish something that's nonfiction as opposed to something that's fiction, because of the reason you said. It's like, it's kind of, there's something, I don't say icky about putting myself out there, but there's something where I can just feel almost like sick about it afterward. Like, I can't believe this person who works with me can just buy this book. And I know it's such a weird thing to say, because like I publish it. I mean, but the truth is, like when you publish with a small press, especially when you do poetry, the safest place to put something is into one of those books, right? Because so few people buy it. So some part of me is like, whatever, no one's ever gonna read this, it's fine. But then the other part of me, like, obviously wants to be read. Why else would I publish it, you know?
Yeah.
But what about you? What about that sort of like how much of yourself makes it into your fiction or any of that question?
I think we're about to turn to the
Oh, yes.
audience Q&A
Okay. Oh, yes.
section.
Oh, yes.
Super quickly, I would say
Quickly.
that, yeah, I guess, part of it is doing, well, but I think you're the same, but part of it is doing the PhD and like, gotta put my skill set to work and help other writers,
The
you know?
skill set.
Yeah.
Yes. We're
And
both
so
really into helping the other writers.
yeah.
If you're a writer and you're not helping other writers, please get out of here now.
Yeah.
Like, I have no
Yeah.
use for you. Like, you're the worst.
Yeah, it's so funny.
Like, what are you even doing with your free time?
I feel like what's really funny is over the years, even like I published 2 books of poetry with small presses and and
Especially when you're a
always,
small press author. Oh my
Yeah.
God, right? I just feel like I'll do anything for other writers.
Yeah, I would get like an email and always be from a dude, and it happens to me like a lot, even more now, really. And they'd be like, "Hey, maybe I could give you a reading somewhere." I'm like, "Cool, thanks." I'm like, "Could you give me a reading?" Hey, maybe I could, publish an interview of yours. I would interview you. I'd be like, "Okay," and they'd be like, "Hey, can I have your agent?
Yeah.
Give your agent's
No,
info?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'll text her right now." You fucking dick,
Yeah.
And so I'm sorry.
I love it.
And so I know, and whereas I'm more like, hey, why aren't people reading Brandon Hobson? I love that people are reading There, and that's a pretty good book. But my friend Brandon Hobson is talking about Cherokees and other natives in the social work system. My friend Kelly Jo Ford, Crooked Hallelujah, is probably the most heartbreaking, brilliant. But it's a novel, but it's also a collection of short stories. What is it? Stories in collection. I don't know. Crooked Hallelujah, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant book. And so I'm like, it's much cooler to have like a community. But as to why fiction, part of it is honestly what's happened is I had all these darker themes in my realism. And also people, when you're in MFA school or PhD school, people are like, literary is good and literary is the only thing you could do. And I'm like, well, define literary. And they're like, good. And I'm like, it's not just good. It is depth of theme, complex characterization, and attention to form and language. And you can do that with horror, and you can do that with romance. And Hemingway is a romance writer. He's just a dude. And the setting is war. And so you can do that with anything. And I was super dorky. And I wanted to read again and write again about elves and spaceships and ghosts. And I wanted it to be like the ghost is real at the end, and that has nothing to do with whether it's literary or not. But at the same time, I'm like, I'll read Colleen Hoover. I just want to know what's in there, So I read it, and I was like, okay, you know what I mean? So I think that non-snottiness is like the best route you can have.
Yeah, this whole thing of like, I won't read this writer, or I don't read romance, or I don't read horror. It's so absurd, and there's so much amazing work being done in all of them.
Yeah.
Okay, audience, we'll be quiet.
Yeah. Everyone's like, It's like when you're teaching and you're like blah 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 blah, and then you're like questions after 20 minutes.
Oh,
of
it's
fucking
okay.
teaching monologue.
I have silent classes all the time where I'm just like, I'm gonna look at you until you say something. So yes.
They always look away.
Yes.
Okay, so for White Horse, you talk a lot about The Shining and Stephen King.
Yeah.
How is that woven into the book?
Well, number one, like Carrie, I was a huge King fan, and so obviously it like hit me hard. It's hit pretty much every horror writer hard. But the other part of it is, the Overlook. Even though it's filmed in England, it's based off of a hotel in Portland in the film. In the book, it's based off of the Stanley, which is in Colorado. And my family went to it all the time, and I was such a nerd that I remember like my sister was embarrassed because I was like, "Is this the blood room?" And. So it's such a part of my childhood. And also it felt like Carrie loves The Shining and loves King so much that because actually they asked me, the dude asked me on Talking Scared the same thing. And he was like, well, it's not instrumental to the plot. And I'm like, it is, because what she learns at the end of the book is that it's her journey. And that wherever she's going to go, these ghosts are going to follow. And so for her, she kind of, she's going there for clues, but she's also going there to escape. And so this is the place, because it's so like fundamental to her identity, the way this relationship to horror and King, that she needs to go there as part of her journey to find out who she is. So. But and I have one small funny anecdote though, because everyone in my family has seen ghosts, even my mother. So even my mother, I'm like, God damn it, because she's the one who's pragmatic, right? She saw my dad, or she had my dad haunt her. My auntie like has seen every ghost, and my grandmother was like, I saw your dad in the sky. Like she has a whole, my grandmother was big on that. So, but I've never seen a ghost. I'm really mad, even though honestly it terrifies me. And
That is
I did
upsetting,
research. God damn it! And so I went to the hotel, the Stanley, with my niece, who's my 15-year-old research assistant, and she loves it. And so we went when she was 14, and I was like, they were like, yeah, there's an old white man who haunts your room, and he stands in the corner and he glares at you and he scratches if he doesn't like you. And I'm like, whatever. And then, but we brought a spirit plate because I was kind of scared of him, and so every time we talked to him, I was like, here's your cornbread. We share this food amongst our people. That fucking light flickered every time we talked to him. And it got to me because in the middle of the night, I'm old, and I was like, Maeve, could you turn the light on? I have to pee. I was scared. I was actually scared because I knew. And like I kept looking in the corners, I'd wake up and I'd be like, but he was never there. But he did flicker the light for us, so that was nice. Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
It's a good anecdote. I like that. Like the cornbread.
Yeah, we brought him cornbread. Share it.
Sounds good.
So.
I think I'm getting hungry.
Yeah, it's very good. Any other questions?
So, I mean, do I need to read The Shining before or watch the movie? What is your recommendation?
No, but you should because it's fun. Although the ending is super weird because I had seen the movie so many times over the years, and as a kid, I'd read the book a lot of times, and then when I reread the book, I was like, that is fucking weird. What is actually happening? Because I don't want to ruin it, but like the bad guy ends up as like a big, okay.
Don't ruin it. But you need to read The Shining just because you need to read The Shining. I just feel like it's just I don't mean like that, but I just mean it's like such a cultural reference, such a touchstone.
Yeah. I've probably sold him 100 books. You're welcome, King.
Yeah, exactly. You should get some cut of that.
Clearly owes me.
Yeah, clearly. I'm sure he's like, thank goodness for Erika.
Yeah, I would be poor.
Yeah. He's like, what would I do?
Yeah, my kid Joe Hill would be very poor and sad. It's not fair that his kid is also talented because I want to be like, no, but I'm like, it's so good.
It is. There's a lot of talent though.
Yeah, and Tabitha, his wife, the whole, so anyway. Yeah. You don't have to ask questions.
I'm like, can we get cornbread now?
This is more of a
Oh, hello.
Hi,
These
Karen.
masks are throwing me off. I can't recognize anybody.
hi, Karen.
Hi.
We used to work together. I'm wondering though, if would you even like the prospect of a very haunted hotel if it meant you got like a season of like writing time? Would you be tempted?
100%.
Yeah, I'd
I
go.
would
Can
be
we
scared.
let's go
Yes.
now.
I'm
I think we
fine
should go
with it.
now.
Yeah.
We should have done that there.
Yes.
We should take books or magic and transport it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I would totally do it. Even though the whole time I'd be like, oh my God, I need my niece, because she can save me because she's 15. But, but yeah, I do want to believe. It's just that in the end, like if it actually happened, I'd be like, oh my God,
Yeah.
so.
Every time I watch it, I am like, it sounds nice though.
I think that too. Like, I'm very envious of the Victorian houses that are haunted houses. Like the one in, Shirley Jackson's, they turn into like this brilliant
Oh my
TV series.
God.
Why is my brain
Yes, Hill
confusing?
House.
I know, like,
The Haunting of Hill House?
I'm like, oh my God, it's so pretty.
That's the thing, but I don't want to live there, but I'm fascinated. It's fascinating.
I probably would do it.
Would you? I don't know if you live. Would you live there?
I live in suburbia.
Yes.
Yeah, I probably would. I'm like, but it has a porch.
That's true. Does it have a yard? Because I feel like the ghosts are fine if there's a yard.
Yeah, you could just camp
As a
out there.
city person, I feel like that sounds worth
Yeah,
it. Like
they're
a
not gonna
good
be
trade-off.
I don't
Yeah.
remember. I'm gonna rewatch it, see if they're in the yard.
Yeah. Like a porch? That sounds like a really nice thing. A porch.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
If there was like ghosts sitting with you on like your porch swing,
Yeah.
seems like it'd be worth it.
Yeah. And then it just turns out to. It just turns out to be like you in the future hanging yourself. You're like, oh well, now I can avoid it.
That's
It's fine.
fine too, but only if there's a porch.
Yeah.
And then the
In a
yard.
beautiful setting.
Yeah, in a beautiful setting. And then the whole
Yeah.
future hang. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's okay. I'm alright with that.
Yeah. Any questions about porches?
Or yards.
Yards.
Or cornbread.
I do have adorable dogs. That's in my bio. She
You
can
do.
read it.
You do.
That's
You should
wow.
follow her on social
Yeah.
media just
Yeah.
for the dogs.
Very cute.
Yeah, they are fluffy.
Yeah.
It's true.
So fluffy.
It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
It's a truism.
Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks,
Okay,
guys.
great.
Thank you so much again to everyone, and thank you, Caroline and Erika, for the conversation. As a reminder, Caroline and Erika will be signing books at our signing desk at the back of the store. So I would suggest we let them settle down there, or settle in down there. We are asking folks to begin making their way down the steps so our booksellers can begin breaking down the space. We do have additional copies of Caroline's book, Weird Girls, and Erika's book, White Horse, available for purchase at our check-in desk. For those still with us on YouTube, you can find the links to purchase books in the description. That is all for me. Thanks again, everyone, for coming out tonight. Join me in join me in giving Caroline and Kate a final round of applause.
I actually really like the idea of my trolls on hold at Target, like for hours. I really like them like holding like she's not really native, and they're like, "Thank you, ma'am." They've been on hold for like 12 hours.
I just can't believe. Thank you so much for coming. I know, but really. I can't believe you came to two. Okay. All right. Yes, I'm gonna. This is my best friend forever, Miku. This is Erika, obviously.